Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are introducing you tonight to a new author, which is always a thrill for us. Over the years, 32 years that we've been doing this, we've never lost the excitement and delight in giving you a new voice. So our new author tonight is called Stacy Willingham, and her book is called A Flicker in the Dark. It is our January 1st mystery book of the month for those people that belong to that club. And it's a good thing, guys, because it sold out rapidly, and your signed first editions, which are between us and Stacy for reasons I won't go into, but all my fault, are going to show up at the Poison Pen next week, and we might have a few left over. So if you don't belong to our first mystery club, this will be your chance to grab one. So Stacy, how nice to meet you.
Yes, so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And any of you who watch Stacy's Twitter feed, our Twitter feed, or our, I'm trying to think, I think I put it in our e-news today. There's a
Oh yeah.
picture of Stacy with a very special cake. So tell us the story of your cake, because I'm so entranced with it.
Yes. That's all my husband actually. I didn't even know he was doing it, but we had a little just a little mini celebration over the weekend to celebrate the book launch last Tuesday because it just came out on January 11th, and he got a basically a giant rectangle cake made with a cover. He had the Flicker in the Dark kind of screen printed on top of fondant icing, and even the sides of it looked like pages. So it was basically a giant book cake, and it looked exactly like my book. Cutting into it was equally exciting and heartbreaking. It's hard to like plunge a knife into the middle of my book, but it was delicious, and we still have some in our fridge.
Wow, how wonderful. I was going to ask you if it was good to eat. I mean, it's one thing to have a good to look at, but if it
It
tasted
was,
like paste.
yeah, it was Oreo flavored, so it
Oh,
was
wow.
delicious. Yeah, and it
Hey,
was a local bakery here in Charleston too that did it for us, so they were great.
that's really nice. We used to do that for authors when come visiting. We would sometimes have cake, but I can't remember how it worked out. But the wherever we got them, eventually said they couldn't do it because they didn't have a copyright on the cover art, and they
Oh,
weren't allowed to do.
interesting.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that was a real. They might have just been like reaching for it.
Yeah. I was gonna
To
say, don't
but
tell
I've
anyone
always
then, because
thought it was a wonderful idea. There was a bookstore in Boulder, Colorado, and that was their thing. For every author that came, they made
yeah,
a book cake.
a book cake, super cute. Yeah, I had seen when I was before I got published and before I even had my agent, I would see those on Twitter on occasion, and they would always make me so jealous because if we something about a book cake and having your own book cover on it just seemed super cool to me. So very cool to finally have my own this weekend.
It absolutely is. So this is your first published book, but is this
It is.
actually your first book? Because oftentimes first novels have actual manuscripts hidden in drawers that they never
Oh
want to
yeah.
reveal.
Yeah. So this is my debut, my first published book, but no, not my first actual book. I wrote my very first book. I started it when I was 22 years old, and I'm 30 right now. I'll be 31 next week, actually, and or in a week and a half. And when I was 22, I started writing a book that took me about 3 years. I wrote it as my thesis when I was in grad school. I got my MFA from SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, and I submitted it to about 100 agents over the course of 2 years, and obviously got turned down by all of them. So about a year into that process, I got the idea for A Flicker in the Dark and decided, since I wasn't having any luck with the first one, I would try it again with the second one. And this is the one that finally got me my agent and my deal.
Well, how exciting for you. Now, one of the things I thought was particularly interesting was her name. I mean, Chloe's an
Mhm.
old-fashioned name. You don't run into a whole lot of Chloe. So is she
Yeah.
going to be the narrator? She's a first-person
Mhm.
narrator in this book. And so basically the story unfolds through her eyes. Why Chloe?
That's actually a good question and one I've not gotten before. And I unfortunately don't even think I have a good answer for you. For some reason, the names, I can get really hung up on like character names or restaurant names or just coming up with just specific names. I don't know why my brain just really gets hung up on it. So a lot of times I'll just have a name pop into my head and I'm like, yeah, sure, that works. And I'll put it down. And sometimes I'll go back and change it if it doesn't fit quite right. But for some reason, when I was first coming up with the idea of A Flicker in the Dark, and I was thinking of the protagonist, that name just popped into my head, and it felt right off the bat. So
Well,
I
I
wish
mean,
I wish I had a good story for you, but I just kind of came up with it and it stuck.
there doesn't
I
have to be
love that
one. I
name
mean,
though.
yeah, sometimes there is one, and you have some interesting male names in the book too. Cooper, Tyler, for example, Daniel, sort of, Daniel, but and are you from South Carolina?
I am, yes. I live in Charleston, South Carolina.
Right.
This is where I am right now. My family's lived here for about 18 years. Somewhere in between there, I went away for college and lived in Atlanta for a couple years. But my husband and I made our way back about 6 years ago. So we've been here for most of my life.
I asked just because the names felt sort of Southern to me. I lived
Yeah.
for a time of my life in Virginia and so forth. And, I grew up in Chicago. So there are names that seem like Midwestern and then, Virginian. And now, of course,
Yeah.
in Arizona, they're different. So I was just kind of curious. There's a lot that goes on in this book, most of which we can't talk about, unfortunately,
I
or we're
know.
going to spoil it. But I did want to, I mean, Chloe has worked her way from trauma to becoming a psychologist. So she's earned a doctorate, even though she ought to be her own patient in many respects.
Yeah.
And so she has, as a result, she has access to a wide array of pharmaceuticals with which
Yes.
she self-medicates herself a lot. And, it's an interesting ethical position to be in, that if she weren't a doctor and couldn't be basically prescribing for herself, how could she cope? Did you have any experience or anything with, that kind of, it's basically an addiction. I don't mean you
Yeah.
personally, but did you know anybody that,
No, no, I mean, yeah, me personally, no, I'm thankful that I've never had to deal with anything like that. I mean, I think everyone has someone in their life that has unfortunately dealt with something like that. So no one's super close to me, but I have seen it, in friends or family members, and I've seen how it can be. Chloe is she's my agent actually once called her a pillbox of contradictions, which I thought was a really good way to describe her because to your point, she's anxious and she does have this addiction that is so clear, but she also she can keep it together for the most of the part. She's very functional, but she's always just kind of teetering on the edge. So part of the reason I made her a psychologist is because she's gone through all this trauma of her childhood. And I thought that, a child who nobody could help would probably want to do everything in her power to help herself. So she became a psychologist and kind of learned about trauma and learned all the coping mechanisms. And she can spout that knowledge off to her patients pretty easily. But when the recipient is herself, she has a really hard time taking her own advice. And I don't know. It's interesting. I think she's probably not alone in that. I think there's a lot of doctors out there who probably don't make the best personal health choices. There's a lot of lawyers out there that, might be tempted to break the law. Like just because someone does something as their profession, they know logically what they're doing is wrong. Once they find themselves in a situation where like they need to use some kind of vice to cope, it's a lot harder for them to think logically, I think. So to answer your question, I mean, Chloe's totally fictional. She's not, based on anyone or anything like that. But yeah, I've seen a little bit of it in my life, as I'm sure a lot of people have, unfortunately.
Well, I think it's an interesting ethical question,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she's clearly a functioning addict, although
Yes.
because she finds herself as this book moves along in frequently compromising situations, or at least questionable situations, the fact that she, has access to, at one point, I think she calls it a whole drawer full of pharmaceuticals, well, she clearly has one, whether that affects her credibility at all.
Yeah. And I think it does at times, but I think also she finds herself in positions where, for example, her brother will like really not listen to what she's saying because he's blaming it on that. And so a lot of times I think it does affect her credibility, and it's part of what makes her kind of an unreliable narrator. But on the other time, I think there's parts when people are kind of pointing to her addiction and saying, you don't know what you're talking about because of this, even when she's fine. So it works against her in that way as well, because people tend to not trust what she's saying, or maybe she'll doubt herself. I mean, maybe she has really great instincts and she feels like she should follow them, but she has this little voice in the back of her head that's kind of asking her, like, can you really trust yourself right now? That's kind of a constant struggle that she goes through during the book.
It absolutely is. I mean, in a way, she's on a quest, you know, or a journey
Hmm.
trying to work her way
Yeah.
towards a better understanding. So why don't you sketch Chloe's background for us, because it's a complicated and interesting one.
Yeah, sure. So basically, Chloe is the daughter of a serial killer, and that's something that she's managed to hide from a lot of people in her life in the present day storyline. She grew up in a small little town called Breaux Bridge in Louisiana, which is actually a real town, and it's the crawfish capital of the world, which is a little tidbit I just love about it. And when she was 12 years old, she was actually the one that stumbled upon a piece of evidence that ended up incriminating her father. So she has a lot of trauma in her life. She also carries around a lot of guilt for, on the one hand, she's related to this serial killer, this monster who's responsible for murdering multiple teenage girls. And she feels guilty just kind of by association, which I did a lot of research into the families of serial killers, and a lot of them feel that way, that kind of guilt by association. They're kind of ostracized in their communities, and people blame them even if they didn't know what was going on. The vast majority of the time they didn't. But on the other hand, she feels guilt by sort of being the one that ended up putting her dad behind bars, because she does have good memories with him. She loves him. I mean, it's a complicated love. She didn't grow up in an abusive household. She had wonderful parents, so she thought. So when she's the one that kind of points the finger at her dad and he goes to jail, she feels guilty about that too. So she's really torn throughout the whole book, just trying to grapple with the fact that the father she thought she had is not the person that she thought he was. And there's her going through feelings of like, how did I not see the red flags? As a grown woman now, she struggles with trusting people, even trusting herself, really, because she's questioning her own judgment quite a bit. So yeah, that's the reason why I told it in the past and present storylines like that, is what she went through in her past absolutely colors the way she acts in the present storyline. Because everything she went through ultimately comes back around and kind of haunts her again in a different way.
Yeah, there's serial killer novels and there are serial killer novels, and most of them are really the hunt for the serial killer.
Yes.
Or the serial killer is the focus, like, Hannibal Lecter,
Hmm.
and people. But, in your book, what's interesting, I think, one of the things that's interesting is that the dad, he's in Angola. He's in, the penitentiary in Louisiana that James
Yeah.
Lee Burke has written about rather dramatically.
Yes.
And so he's not on stage. He's not
Mhm.
on stage in this book. And that makes it a different kind of serial killer novel.
Yes, someone else kind of described him to me, which I really loved, as like an off the page antagonist, which I absolutely agree with. He's never really there in the present day, but he's always just kind of hovering in the background. And I kind of did that intentionally too. There's a lot of reasons why I put Chloe in Louisiana and in Baton Rouge in the present day, but one reason is Baton Rouge and Angola are not that far from each other. I mean, maybe an hour and a half drive. And the fact that Chloe has spent 20 years of her life basically trying to pretend that her father is dead. I mean, she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. She doesn't want to speak to him. She doesn't want to talk to him. But he's only an hour away. Is something that I thought was really interesting, because she obviously did not escape him at all. They're within driving distance of each other throughout the entire book. So yeah, I went back and forth a lot about how much to actually include him in the present day story, but I ended up to focus it on Chloe and the family more so than the father.
Well, you did. And I mean, I think it was right for the story. As I said, it just makes it an interesting variation, let's say, on the serial killer trope.
Yeah.
What about her mom? You know, we've been talking about her dad, but without giving anything particularly away. What about her mother in all this?
Yeah, so the mother, it plays a really interesting role too. Every single member of the family, I think, plays an interesting role, because one thing that I was thinking about a lot when I was writing it was people deal with trauma in different ways, and there is no right or wrong way to deal with it. And when I was thinking about, if there was a family and the father figure of the family ended up being a serial killer, what would happen if every single other member of the family dealt with that in a different way, and how would it affect the three of them moving forward? So Chloe dealt with it in one way, her brother dealt with it in another way, and their mother dealt with it in a completely different way. And so yeah, I don't want to go into too many specifics because
No.
I don't want to ruin anything in the book, but I just thought it would be really interesting, because once the father is now away in prison, the three of them are left together. And if the three of them are not on the same page about how they're dealing with things, that creates kind of even more damage in an already very damaged family. So yeah, the mom plays a really important role too, because the way she dealt with it all is definitely affected her children too, after an already very traumatic experience.
Absolutely true. So with all that as a background, there is it looks as though a serial killer is back at work. Is it a copycat serial killer? Is it the father that has inspired the copycat serial killer? And Chloe is the one who really senses that this might be what's going on. And so that's really what gets her going. She's not looking to exonerate anybody. She's looking actually to figure out, what's going on in the present. And because of her past history, it's a really complicated story for her. I like the detective, I think, because obviously at some point, we have to get a cop involved.
Yeah.
And he has to deal with Chloe. And, I think he's unusually empathetic for a cop in a position like that.
Yeah. I think so. He definitely sees, I think he has moments where he gets kind of frustrated with her, but then he kind of remembers the situation that she's in. There's a part in the book where Chloe really doesn't want to go to the police for a while. And if people will get frustrated with her. I mean, it's like that always seems to be in a thriller. The protagonist like wants to play the detective and do things herself and never go to the police. And in a sense, you kind of need that in order to get some action in the story. You can't just have everyone running to the cops when something bad happens. But at the same time, when Chloe explains it, it does make sense. She kind of says, look, like, my childhood was consumed by the fact that my father is a serial killer. I mean, as soon as he went to prison, she was miserable in her hometown until she was able to get away and move to Baton Rouge. And with these things happening again now around her, she has this horrible sinking feeling that it's happening again. And she kind of sees the signs the way she did the first time around, but she doesn't want to jump to conclusions and throw herself in the middle of something like this again, because finally she's kind of at a place of peace in her life. She has a job that she really loves. She's engaged to be married to a seemingly perfect man. And so yeah, I hope readers understand her hesitancy to go to the cops, because she's lived through something traumatic and she just really doesn't want to live through it again. And that's a big part of the reason why she kind of drags her feet on that for such a long time. And I think Detective Thomas, he gets frustrated with her, but then he'll realize the situation that she's in. And I agree. I think he does display some empathy towards her.
Yeah, no, I thought he was very patient. Another question would certainly be, would some people in Chloe's position have, reinvented themselves and, hidden her entire history, taken a different name, moved to the other side of the world, on and on and on. And I mean, there are many books where we read that that's what's happened, and then unmasking that identity becomes part of the story. But Chloe hasn't chosen to go that route.
Yeah, she's from it from a sense in that she doesn't actively talk about it. But yeah, I mean, she did not go as far as to like change her name or her identity or anything like that. So if people wanted to connect the dots, they absolutely could. But she kind of has, there's a scene in the book where she talks about her first date with who became her fiance, sitting at the bar, and every question he asks her, kind of like she gets this like prickle on the back of her neck because she thinks he knows who she is, and he's just kind of like poking at her to get her to admit it. And I thought that was really interesting too, because if you are the daughter of a serial killer or someone who is attached to something awful and you just don't want anyone to know, I feel like you would constantly be paranoid that people knew, you know what I mean? So she's on this date with this really great guy, and he's asking her things like, you from around here? Where'd you grow up? Like, you know, do you have any siblings? And every normal question he asks, she's kind of twisting in her head as like, oh, he knows and he just wants me to admit it, you know? So I thought that was, she was fun to write in that way. Just trying to get in her head and figure out all the normal situations that would maybe cause her to spiral a little bit.
So in the end, there's a resolution to Chloe's story. Did you envision this as a one-time story? I mean, a standalone, as we call it in the trade, a book, or did you envision Chloe as somebody with another story yet to be told?
You know, I envision it as a standalone just because I with the way that I ended it, and I don't know if I would want to drag it out even more. But I I'm not going to say it has an open-ended ending, but I think one thing that I really love about fiction is the fact that in a really good book, in my opinion, if you close the book, you can still keep thinking about it for a really long time. And I think Chloe and every single character, they do have bits of their ending that's not quite resolved that could certainly lend itself to a sequel or something along those lines. I mean, there's still a lot of questions to be answered, and the question of like, what does life look like after this big journey that everyone goes on during a flicker in the dark. But as of right now, I have no plans on a sequel. I see it as a standalone, but what is exciting is, I'm not sure if you've heard, but it's been optioned for a TV series with HBO Max. So fingers crossed, if that comes to fruition, I'm sure they're going to do incredible things with all the characters, because they'll have unlimited time to figure out where they go from here.
Well, I wasn't advocating for a sequel. I think, because as you said, there's some open-ended threads of the narrative that you could still address. But also, I think that's an okay way to leave a standalone book. I mean, go back to Margaret Mitchell and Gone with the Wind. I mean, we don't know what happens when Scarlett goes back to Tara, and honestly, I don't think we should. I think we should. Everyone gets to imagine their own ending, which I've always thought was one of the more powerful points of Gone with the Wind. That it
I
like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love to hear that. And yeah, I feel the same way. You can kind of imagine what you want. And it's funny, I've had so many readers reach out to me and be like, but what happens with this? Like, I have to know. And I'm like, I don't really want to tell you, because it's not up to me to decide that. I mean, take what you read throughout this whole book, and what do you think happens, or what do you want to happen? Like, I mean, you can believe whatever you want to believe is going to happen. So yeah.
No, I think you've given the reader the freedom to write their own story, which is a very wonderful thing. So this is you're on your journey here with the first novel. Why don't you tell us about, you mentioned that you'd written a manuscript and it didn't go anywhere, so now you did this one. But people always want to know, particularly from a first novelist, how did you get an agent, and what does it feel like to have finally become a published author?
Yeah, it feels amazing. It's incredible. It's the journey to getting an agent and getting published is so long and grueling, and it's very full of rejection. And kind of when you're like in the trenches of it, you hope that one day it'll pay off, but you're so used to being in the trenches. It's just kind of how it is for a while. So now that I'm published and all this is actually happening, I'm a little bit stunned, to be honest. It feels a little bit surreal. I actually found out last night that A Flicker in the Dark hit the New York Times bestseller list, and that is like still not completely sunk in yet. So yeah, it's amazing. But finding my process to finding an agent was the first time getting an agent in for A Flicker in the Dark is actually, it was a completely different experience than trying to get an agent for my first book. My first book, I mentioned, I queried about 100 agents, and some of them were interested enough to read the whole book, but none of them interested enough to ultimately sign me. And with The Flicker in the Dark, I finished in January of 2020. I had queried 5 agents my first week, and I heard back from one of them asking me to get on the phone. So I got on the phone with him a couple days later, and it was Dan Conway at Writer's House, who's now my agent. And he told me on the phone that he was 3 chapters in, he couldn't put it down, and he wanted to sign me on the spot. And I was like, wait, but like, what if you hate the ending? And he was like, we'll deal with that when we get there. Like, I just want to snatch it up now. And so it happened that fast. I think after the first time around, doing this for 2 years with no reward was, I was expecting something similar. But the second time around, it lasted, barely 3 weeks. It was a whirlwind, to say the least.
So are you one of those people that always wanted to be a writer, or is this something you worked your way towards? I mean, you obviously put a lot of time into this, but life meantime goes on the side. So
Yeah.
what was your motivation in continuing to find a new story and find an agent?
Yeah, I have always wanted to be a writer. It's something that I've been doing since I was a kid. I started writing, little short stories and screenplays and stuff when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And when I went to high school, I joined my high school newspaper, and it made me really fall in love with like interviewing people and learning their backstories and just telling stories. So for a while, I wanted to be a journalist. So I went to the University of Georgia, majored in magazine journalism, and when I graduated, I had a pretty hard time finding a job as a journalist. I wanted to work at a newspaper or magazine, and I just couldn't find anything. So I went into marketing, did some copywriting, and did some freelance journalism on the side to try and keep writing. But I think when I was working full time, I wasn't writing as much as I wanted to, and I just realized that I really missed it. And I liked writing those freelance articles, but I would always write like really long form descriptive articles. They would be like 15 pages long. And my editors would just like completely slash them and take out all the like descriptive pretty parts. And I was like, God, this isn't what, like, this is not the kind of writing I want to do. So it was at that point when I started thinking that fiction was probably what I would be interested in. I had a lot of story ideas, and I liked telling real people's stories, but I also kind of liked making them up too. So yeah, it was pretty shortly after I graduated college, when I was 22, when I started really thinking about wanting to try and make this work. So yeah, I went to grad school, got my MFA, figured that I would learn a lot there and hopefully have some professors available to really help me out, which they did. They read my first book and gave me some great feedback. And even though that one didn't work out, I personally believe, a failed first novel, it's not failed because it was kind of my practice novel. It helped me figure things out. And so it played its role, and it's okay if no one ever reads it. It's probably for the best, actually.
What do you think the weakness of it? What do you think, that didn't make it click?
That's a good question. I think I was still figuring out my writing style. Like, for example, that first one was written in third person, and A Flicker in the Dark is written in first person. And what I really love about writing A Flicker in the Dark and writing Chloe was just really getting in her head. And I've heard from a lot of readers that they felt anxious when Chloe was anxious, and they kind of related to her in certain ways. And so yeah, I think maybe that first one in third person and not feeling a personal connection to the characters really just made it feel, it just wasn't as emotional of a book, I don't think. And just for logistical reasons, I mean, I didn't fully know how to like structure chapters yet, and things like that. A lot of it was trial and error. And when you've been working on a book for 5 years, I mean, 3 years of writing it, 2 years of revising it and submitting it, at a certain point, I think I just kind of lost the spark. Like, I stopped
Mm.
caring about it. And then I had this other idea that started getting me excited. And I wasn't passionate enough about it to get across the finish line, I don't
Right.
think.
No, I think that can have a lot to do with it. You've also
Yeah.
chosen to write this in the present tense. So,
Mhm.
there's an immediacy. I mean, I go back and forth. I find that
Yeah.
present tense can often be exhausting. So, and I'm an older reader, so I'm more used to the past tense.
Yeah.
But I think for this particular story that, it needs to be in the present tense, even though you have the flashback parts. So
Mhm.
it's a much more complicated structure. I think it takes more confidence in yourself as a writer in order to put together this novel. So I agree with you that
Mhm.
probably the practice you had on the first one.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely think so. And it's funny, I had a event with Litchfield Books in Polly's Island the other day, and I brought that up about the confidence aspect of it. I think when I was writing the first one, I felt like I know what I'm doing, and I'm writing a book with the intention of trying to get an agent and trying to get published. And I don't want to say I was writing what I thought they wanted, but have my own voice yet. And for some reason, getting rejected so many times, I was saying at this store in Polly's Island, it kind of made me bolder and more confident, because your biggest fear as a writer is people not liking your work and rejecting you. And when you live that 100 times, at a certain point, you're just like, whatever, like, I don't care. So I think when I was writing A Flicker in the Dark, I was definitely more confident in my writing, even though I had failed to get published for so long. I just felt like I had stepped into my own style, and I liked it. And so that's how I decided to write it. I don't know. I kind of wrote A Flicker in the Dark for myself in that sense, not for anybody else, because I don't think I was going into it with a ton of expectations that anything would happen to it, or happen with it, since nothing happened the first time.
Well, that will probably stand you in good stead, because one thing that can happen to somebody who writes their first novel and it becomes such a success, as you pointed out. In fact, I announced it today when I was promoting your event tonight, that you had made the New York Times bestseller list,
Mhm.
which is a really remarkable thing
Thank
for a
you.
first novel, let alone to be in the top tier of it. That sometimes paralyzes people. When you've had a success like that, some people feel or fear they can never equal it again. And I would be sad for you if that turned out to be the case. But it sounds like your 100 rejections and all the rest of it have toughened you up, so that
Thank you.
while you didn't lose heart because you were rejected, hopefully you won't panic and and fear that you can't do another. This is why the second book is always the hardest book for any writer. I
Yes.
mean, we have watched this forever, and I
Mhm.
will tell you that in our experience, there's kind of a curve that happens to many authors, in which you start out here, and your second book does a dip, and then the
Yeah.
third one can sometimes even dip a little further, and it's the fourth one, should you stay the course, that
Yeah.
rises up. So it's this kind of S-shaped curve that you may have
Yeah.
read about. Now, it's not always true, but it's good. You have to do whatever, you have to write whatever story you want to write. You're not doing a series. One of the reasons I asked you about that, because sometimes, if you start with a series, you've already got some parameters for your second book. You already
Mhm.
know, some things about it. You're not world building all over again.
Right. Yeah.
And so that can be helpful. But anyway, it sounds like you're going to be able to forge a path of your own that will be. So you have good family support. You've mentioned your husband, the guy with the cake.
Yeah.
So he sounds like a really supportive husband.
Yeah, he's great. My whole family's great. And I even said in the acknowledgments of A Flicker in the Dark, like, I understand if people can form conclusions about my family based on the dysfunctional families I write about, but I'm lucky that my family is not like the families I write about. They're wonderful. My parents have kind of encouraged my love of writing for my entire life. My sister is always the one that I give my first drafts to when they're terrible, and she reads them with a smile on her face and gives me really good feedback for the next round. And my husband, yeah, I mean, he's, this is tough for him too, because writing is very time consuming. And so, here, it's 8 o'clock on a Thursday, and he made dinner, and he's very, very supportive of everything that I do. So I'm lucky. I know that makes a really big difference, having people around you that cheer you on. So.
Well, I'm sitting here talking to you at night on a Thursday, and my supportive husband
Yeah.
is cooking dinner with a friend in the kitchen.
Yeah, we're lucky.
Well, that's really true. 32 years of doing this would never have been possible. I started this on my 50th birthday. So, you would have thought that I had already finished, my career things. And intent, the Poison Pen is actually, it's a not-for-profit operation. I do it for fun. And I really enjoy that. But without his support, I would never have been able to do it, because as you say, it's not a normal family life structure. If you're spending your time, we had a live event last night at the store, and part of that, part of the fun of that for authors who come to see us is we all go out to dinner afterwards. So many authors just come for the after party.
Yeah.
And, the actual event is not nearly as big a draw for some of them as, the going out afterward part. But that means that, I'm away from home. I'm out with it. But then I say to myself, there are not many people my age who can go out to dinner with good looking, middle-aged, or even young men. and nobody's going like, or whatever it is. So there are definite advantages to that kind of a career. And you'll find as a writer that, whenever the world comes back to sort of a more normal thing, that, conferences and publicity and book tours and all that thing can be part of it. And so some writers choose, some couples tend to do it together, and others, it doesn't work out that way. And so you'll have decisions to make about how that will work for you.
Yeah. I've had a busy, gosh, A Flicker in the Dark was just published last Tuesday. So it's only been a week and a half, but pretty much every day for the last week and a half, I've had 1, 2, 3 events a day. They've pretty much all been virtual. So it's not like I'm physically leaving the house, but you stay very busy. And he works a 9-to-5 job. So it's kind of like he's gone and working during the day. And then when he gets back, I hop on the computer with the door closed and I'm working. But he's used to it by now, because when I wrote A Flicker in the Dark, I was working full time. So basically I was working from 9 to 5, but I would write in the mornings before work, at nights after work, and usually at least one Saturday or Sunday. So he's been dealing with this for like
for
years, for like a decade now. Yeah.
What were you doing? What was your job?
So many different jobs, which for a long time I thought of as kind of like a character flaw, because they say like you shouldn't hop around on your resume, but I could never find a job that I loved, and I think it's because I just always wanted to do this. So I started out in marketing. I ran the social media channels for a couple different brands for a while. That was my very first job out of college. And then I did PR for a little bit. I did copywriting for a little bit. I was an account manager for a little bit, really just a little bit of everything. And the job that I left to write full time, so the job that I was working at right before I got my book deal, I was doing a lot of like branding and brand strategy. So super heavy in the marketing and advertising world, but a little bit of everything, honestly. I probably got a new job like every 2 years, because I was constantly looking for something that I loved as much as writing. Because I was like, all right, if I can't write for a living, I need to find something I like. And thankfully this worked out. So
well, I'm glad it did. But actually all that experience will really pay off for you as a writer. But many writers, today there's an enormous pressure on writers, to use social media and all the rest of it. And so it sounds like you're equipped with all the right tools. So let's, I'm not going to ask you about what you're working on, because, it's so early that in your I mean, you just started, so it seems kind of
I'm
cool.
actually almost, my editor has it. We're on draft 2.
Oh,
So
really? Oh,
yes,
wow.
yeah, I was gonna say, when you were talking earlier about the sophomore book being
Yeah.
kind of terrifying, I'm so thankful because both my agent and my editor told me 18 months ago when A Flicker in the Dark was got its deal. Basically, they said the exact same thing. They were like, the second book is very intimidating. There's going to be a lot of pressure, and it's going to be even worse once you start seeing reviews roll in, good or bad. I mean, if it's extremely successful, you're going to feel the pressure to perform and make the second one just as good. If the reviews are bad, that's going to get in your head when you're writing, and you're going to be paralyzed. So they basically told me 18 months ago to try and write the second book before the first one even came out. And
Good.
yeah, and I'm glad they told me that because I did. And it's we definitely still have some editing to do. It's early in the editing stages, but at least it's a couple drafts are done, and I'm feeling good about it. So
Well, that's wonderful. And, it used to be the books came to publication a lot more quickly than they
mhm.
do today. So, 18 months is, I mean, over the years, there have been many authors whose first book was published and they suddenly have, like 8 months or nine
Yeah,
months, 6 months or something to write a
yeah,
second book. So the fact that it's now taking longer to get a book to market does give you that opportunity. The other writers who are often well off are writers who write a book that is successful, but they've had 2 or 3 or 4 ideas or whatever that haven't come to, and so
yeah.
they can draw on those.
Yeah,
Um, you
yeah,
know,
that is a good point. So yeah, that's definitely helped. And it's funny, writing my second book was the first time I've ever written under deadline before.
right.
So even though I had 18 months, I was like, I've never written under deadline. I had all the time in the world to write A Flicker in the Dark because no one was expecting it. But I wrote book number 2 in about 8 months, so much faster. But I was also writing full time at that point, so I wasn't trying to juggle that with as many other responsibilities as I had before.
Well, it sounds like you're in excellent shape, so I'm really delighted
I
to
hope
hear all
so.
that. Patrick, why don't we summon you up and see if you have any questions for Stacy or if anybody else does.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see here. Where am I? Okay. Yeah, we got some good questions. Christina wants to know, she says, what's been the best part of the publishing process and the worst part? Is
That's a
there a
good
worst part?
question. It's funny. I feel like the best part and the worst part are almost the same thing, and that is getting other people's reactions and opinions and feedback to the story. I kept my writing very private for a really long time, even though I was working for 7 years writing and trying to get an agent and trying to get published. I was too scared to share it with too many people. So I would let my immediate family read it, but I would never let anyone else read it. So when A Flicker in the Dark was published, I mean, there was only a handful of people like who had ever read it before. My family, a handful of close friends, and my agent and the folks at Minotaur. And the idea of having just like a flood of opinions coming at me was terrifying. And sometimes it's still hard. There's definitely the comment or the review that'll really get under my skin, and I can't stop thinking about it. But the vast majority of people I've heard from and spoken to have been so kind. And that's been the best part. I think going so long not sharing my writing with people and having such a positive reception for the most part it's been the best thing ever.
I'm pretty sure that Christina is the Christina who is going to have her first novel published next year by your publisher, and
Oh,
is in
really?
fact a prize winner. And so it's okay with you. I'm pretty sure it is you, Christina.
It is.
I'll put you in touch with her because she lives here, and we're very excited for her.
Absolutely. I think if this is the same Christina, we might have spoken on Twitter the other day, and she told me that she was going to be popping on. So yeah, I would love to chat. And especially since you're with Minotaur, welcome to the family.
Yeah, well, she's been a great supporter of the store, and I'm so delighted for her that she's going to be a published author and has been successful. So,
Yeah.
Patrick, any other
Very
questions?
exciting. Yeah. Let's see. Nola has several questions for you.
Mhm.
She wants to know, So did you read lots of books about real life serial killers?
Mhm. I did. I read books and I've watched a lot of documentaries. A lot of people are into true crime, myself included. And there was just something about watching different documentaries and reading books that had me interested in the psychology of serial killers. I was really interested in like, why do they do the things that they do? It's so hard for a normal person to wrap their mind around. So yeah, I know all about all the real serial killers. It's kind of a morbid fascination, but it was when I made the mental pivot from thinking about the serial killer itself to the serial killer's family, that I really came up with the book idea.
Let's see here. How did you fact check some of the medical information in the book?
That's a good question.
Mhm.
A lot of research and a lot of speaking to people in my life who are in some kind of medical field. So everything and multiple proofreaders at Minotaur. So they have the proofreaders at Minotaur are incredible. I think it was probably proofread like 10 times, and they really go through it with like a fine tooth comb. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a mistake or two in there. I'm human and you can't catch everything, but I really did try to make it as accurate as possible.
You needed a pharmacist
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about your writing routine? What's an average writing day like for you?
Yeah. So every day is a little bit different, but if I'm in kind of the throes of writing a new book, I try to start every morning by reading. I'm a big reader, and I think reading a really good book from a writer I admire just kind of helps gets my creative juices flowing. So I'll do that for about an hour, and then I sit down and I write for probably 3-4 hours. I usually try to break up my day by taking my dog for about a 3-mile walk every day, and that's where I do a lot of my plotting. So I don't outline. When I start to write, I pretty much know what the big idea is. I know who my protagonist is, and I have a vague idea of what the ending is going to be, but that's pretty much the only structure I give myself. But when I go on these walks, I just let my mind really wander, and that's just when I work a lot of stuff out. I mean, if I have like a plot hole that I'm getting frustrated with, I find after 30 minutes around the block, I've picked at it in my head so many times. By the time I get home, I've kind of figured it out. And then I write for the rest of the day. And if I'm on a roll, sometimes I go till like 10 o'clock at night. I'm more of a marathon writer. I mean, I can write for 10 or 12 hours a day sometimes, and then I'll go a week taking a break, which is, I don't know if that's normal. A lot of people set word counts or time limits. That's never worked for me for some reason.
Does your dog ever poop out after like 2.5 miles?
No, because he has endless energy. He could keep going for another 10 miles, but I'm usually the one that needs to go back. So
I have a black lab, and sometimes she'll just stop and sit.
yeah.
And she's
How
too
old is
big
she?
to carry.
I have
I'm
a
hearing my puppy baying in the next room. At some point, I'm going to have to open the door.
How old is your puppy?
We have two puppies. They're Cavapoos, and they're litter mates, and they're very, very different. One's white and one's black, and they're now 6 months old or so, and they're as big as they're going to get, which is about 12 pounds. So
Yeah.
old people need smaller dogs because we can't really either pick them up or rein them in. So
My parents just got a puppy. They got a schnoodle, and she is probably 4 months now, and 4.5, 5 pounds. She's tiny. Yeah, but my Labradoodle is 3.5 years old and 65 pounds. So he's hyper and he's young and he's huge. So
excellent.
Are you a plotter or a pantser, as they say?
I'm more of a pantser. Yeah, I have a vague idea of what my books are. I kind of know the big idea, but I go in pretty blind with a lack of concrete details.
Did you always know that it was going to be a crime novel, or were you thinking about it in those terms?
Yeah, I think I always knew that. I read somewhere to write what you wish you could read, basically like write your dream book. And I read a lot of thrillers. I read all genres, but for some reason crime fiction is usually what I gravitate towards. So that's what I wanted to write.
There's a really nice comment from a lady named Lynn who's watching. She says, I read the book summary and wasn't sure I wanted to read it due to the serial killer aspect. But having listened to you, I have totally changed my mind.
Oh,
Really
thank
looking forward to
you.
this book.
It's really not a serial killer book. I tried to make that clear. It's about, I remember back when Gabby Giffords was shot by that, man down in Tucson and all. And he wasn't really that interesting. But what many of us wondered about was, what about his family? How would his parents feel? How would you lead your life after your child had done something like that? And I think that that's a really important thing to, an important study. So Stacy's book, that there's the violence, this is not a violence on the page, gore splattered serial killer
No, it's
novel at
not.
all.
Yeah. Which there's absolutely some creepy parts to it. And, we're dealing with a serial killer, but yeah, it's not a violent book. It's not a gory book. I actually, oddly enough, have a huge phobia of blood, which is sort of weird as someone who writes crime, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of overly gory things either. I like the psychological aspect of crime more than the violent aspect of it. So I don't think any of my books will ever be very violent.
You never know.
Yeah, never say never, I guess.
You might grow into it.
Yeah.
Who are some of your favorite writers?
It's a good question. I love Gillian Flynn. She is kind of, stereotypical answer probably, but I think Dark Places is the first book of hers that I read. And she was one of the first writers that made me realize that you can write a thriller, very fast paced, but also very descriptive and well written. She manages to strike a very clean balance between those two. It's, she has multiple paragraphs of beautiful language, but then she can pick it up at just the right spot to keep you turning pages. So I really admire that about her. I love Emma Cline. The Girls by Emma Cline is one of my favorite books. I really like cult books, and I think she wrote a really good cult book. And Megan Abbott, I love. And I grew up on Stephen King, and so I'm a Stephen King fan too. He's great.
Do you think you have a cult book in you?
I would love to write a cult book. There's so many good ones out there, though. I do have a of an idea in the back of my head about a pretty interesting cult book idea. So maybe one day. It's not going to be the next one, but I have a thought that I'm stewing on.
We all need a good cult book.
Mm.
Let's see. Most of these are just, let's see, congratulations and how exciting for you,
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see, anything else? You already spoke to this a little bit, but sorry, I lost it. It's about the point of view in present tense versus past tense. And did you try past tense, before, or how did you arrive on?
Yeah. Writing it present tense was, I don't even know if I made that a conscious decision, but I think when I was going into it, I really wanted the reader to just be riding alongside Chloe the whole time and feeling everything she's feeling. And with the action happening in the present tense, that felt like the best way to do that. I also, the past and present intertwining in A Flicker in the Dark is a little bit different in that I don't do page breaks or chapter breaks. Sometimes, you'll be in the present tense and then you'll kind of flip to the past tense within the same paragraph sometimes. And the reason why I did that is because Chloe's dealing with some pretty major deja vu throughout the whole book, because these things are happening in her present day life that are really reminding her of things that happened in her childhood. And so when she kind of gets sucked into those memories, I wanted the reader to feel that too. They're riding alongside her and all of a sudden she's having this moment of deja vu, and then we're back in Brobridge 20 years ago. So it's kind of subtle. I'm not sure if readers would even notice, but the past tense scenes are written in the past tense. The present tense is written in the present tense, and they are not, sometimes I go from present to past within, a sentence or two of each other. And that was
her internal monologue, maybe. Well, when she goes inward, it goes into the past.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that was a way for me to indicate we're here, but like mentally she's not here anymore. She's thinking about something else, was using the tense like that.
Gotcha.
It's a very sophisticated structure for a first novel, which is
Thank
one
you.
of the things that's really interesting about it. If you know, are somebody who, you know, wants to look at the craft of writing in addition to reading a good story. I mean, you can look at this both ways, which is great.
Thank you.
Right. So Stacy, it's really been a terrific pleasure to read
Yes.
your book and talk to you. And thank you again for autographing copies for us.
Absolutely.
As I said, we haven't got a whole lot of them left, and they're being slightly delayed because I didn't do my job, but now we're in good shape. Anyway, it's really been a treat to meet you. I hope that
Yes,
you'll be
you
able
too.
to come visit us in Scottsdale one of these
I
days.
would love that. I've never been to Scottsdale, but it's been on my list forever. So I would love to come visit.
Well, that'd be great. And virtual is a wonderful thing, and in many ways, probably kinder to you as a first novelist than thrusting you in front of, you know, rooms full of people and so forth. I sometimes, do you think that's true, Patrick, that maybe it's a bit of an easier ride at the moment for a debut novelist?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, luckily we can do both. You know, if we have a live event, we can, you know, we've been taping them and doing essentially the same thing. But I don't know. That's a really good question.
I know. I think it is too. We've been doing this for 20 years. We videoed all of our live events.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We've upgraded our equipment now at the store, but I mean, doing Zoom and virtual events was absolutely no different than what we had done. We did a live event last night. We're doing you, and both of them are on our Facebook and our YouTube streaming channels. So
we can reach a lot more people, you know, this way. And
you can catch a lot more people, and you can also have you miss the excitement of real people in the room talking to you and their questions, but you can have a much more in-depth conversation without all of that.
Yeah, you know, I was gonna say, I obviously don't have anything to compare it to because you know, I've not yet been in a big room full of people. The readers I've gotten to meet in person, I love that so much. Like, I do wish I could meet readers in person more, but it is kind of nice. I mean, this is such a personal and intimate conversation. I have no idea how many people are watching right now. If I did, it would probably make me nervous. So I think it does.
Actually, the way that we do it, the really interesting part is not how many people are watching it now, it's how many people are going to watch it, because
later,
the long tail of this, you know, if you think about it, it would be like buying a ticket to a theater performance. And then if it turned out you couldn't go, or you were sick, or, you know, whatever it was, you would miss the performance. But the great thing about the way this works is that if people can't show up during our conversation while we're having it, they can watch it for ages. Also, there's a podcast that we make of the soundtrack. So I'll send you the podcast tomorrow. And that's been a really nice thing, and I think has really been great for authors. So your social media then gets to promote the podcast links and the video links. So I'll get those to you tomorrow.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I do have a question about a couple of people have asked, you know, commented on how much they like the title. And was that your title, or was that a collaborative effort?
It was a collaborative effort for sure. It's kind of a funny story. When I wrote the book, or when we submitted the book, it was always kind of a working title, because I didn't have a title that I loved, but I submitted it as The Shadows. And the day, because the tagline is "Some shadows never disappear," so they pulled that from the original title, which is kind of cool. But the day my agent and I sent it out on submission, Alex North's The Shadows was published. And we were like, oh no, like, we're sending this book out on submission the day a book with the exact same title is getting published. So we always knew it was going to change, but landing on the title it took a while, and it was very much a collaborative process with multiple people involved. But fireflies are a pretty big piece of symbolism in the book, and I knew I wanted them on the cover somehow. And there's a line in the book that
there's
just
a
says,
line
like,
at the very end of the book. There is a line, "A flicker in the dark." So I was going to ask you, did you write that in afterward, or was it there and that became the title?
It was there, and that became the title, because we were trying to think of, we didn't want to say fireflies. I mean, that felt too on the nose. But just skimming through the manuscript, trying to find a title, I read that like a flicker in the dark line, and it just fits in so many ways. And
Yeah.
we probably went through like
Flicker is a
50
great word
titles.
too.
Mhm.
Flicker, you don't hear it too often in titles. I can't.
No.
Yeah, very
No,
atmospheric.
longer titles you don't see as many of them. There's a real passion for like 2-word and 3-word titles. They look better on digital
Yeah.
assets and all the rest of it. But I think A Flicker in the Dark is a terrific title
Yeah.
for this book.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet. So good night, Stacy. It was really a
Yeah.
pleasure to meet you. Hope to
Good
see
night.
you again.
Thank you
night.
so much. You
And
too.
thank you all for watching us. We
Bye.
appreciate it. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.